My beloved child, stop scrolling for just a moment, because the person your soulmate met was never supposed to know your name. They had never seen your face, never heard your voice, and had no ordinary reason to know anything about the connection between you and the person who carries you quietly in their heart. Yet somehow, in the middle of an ordinary day, a stranger looked directly at your soulmate and said something that made the entire moment feel different. Stay away from that person until you understand who they really are. Your soulmate froze. Not because the stranger sounded harsh. Not because the words carried fear. But because there was something strangely certain in the way they were spoken, as though this person had noticed something your soulmate had been trying to understand for months. Stay with me, because the warning was not what it first appeared to be. Don't look away now. Your soulmate immediately wondered whether someone had been talking about you behind their back, whether a hidden conversation had taken place, or whether this stranger somehow knew a chapter of your story that had never been spoken aloud. But when your soulmate asked, "Do you know them?" the stranger gave an answer that created an even deeper mystery. No. But I recognize what happens when someone like that enters another person's life. That sentence stayed in the air. Your soulmate could not dismiss it. Something about it reached directly into all those moments they had never been able to explain, the strange calm they sometimes felt when thinking about you, the way your name seemed to return to their mind during important decisions, the unusual timing of certain memories, and the feeling that meeting you had quietly divided their life into a before and an after. What comes next changes everything, because your soulmate expected the stranger to reveal something negative. Instead, the stranger said, "You think you need to stay away because this person is wrong for you. But perhaps you need distance because you still don't understand what their presence is revealing about you." Your soulmate stared at them. Suddenly, the warning had changed meaning. This was not simply a stranger trying to separate two people. This was someone pointing toward a truth your soulmate had been avoiding. Don't skip, because the next words connected directly to who you really are in this story. The stranger explained that some people enter our lives and fit perfectly into the version of ourselves we already know. They make everything comfortable, predictable, familiar. But once in a lifetime, someone can arrive who acts like a mirror. Not because they are perfect, not because destiny guarantees an outcome, but because their presence makes hidden emotions impossible to ignore. And your soulmate knew immediately what the stranger meant. You had done that without even trying. You had awakened questions they had buried. You had made them reconsider what loyalty meant, what emotional honesty meant, what kind of future they actually wanted, and why they had spent so long pretending they were satisfied with relationships and expectations that never reached their deepest self. This is where the story begins, because your soulmate suddenly remembered the first time they realized you were different. It was not some dramatic moment. It was something small. Perhaps a sentence you said. Perhaps the way you listened. Perhaps the way you walked away instead of begging to be understood. Whatever it was, something about you remained. And that frightened them, not because there was something frightening about you, but because they could not control how deeply the encounter had affected them. They had met attractive people before. Interesting people before. Kind people before. But you had become a question. A question they could not answer by simply distracting themselves. And now a complete stranger was standing before them, somehow describing exactly that feeling. Some connections, the stranger continued, do not arrive to make you comfortable. They arrive to show you where you have been hiding from yourself. Your soulmate's expression changed. They asked how this person could possibly know that. The stranger did not claim to predict the future. They did not claim supernatural certainty. Instead, they noticed something simple your soulmate had failed to notice. Every time your soulmate spoke about you, their entire energy changed. Their voice became softer. Their sentences became longer. They remembered tiny details. They defended you even while pretending they had moved on. And whenever they tried to explain why they should forget you, they sounded as though they were trying to convince themselves rather than anyone else. Your answer is closer than you think. Because the shocking truth was not that this stranger knew some hidden secret about your identity. The stranger had simply seen what your soulmate could no longer hide. You mattered. Far more than they had admitted. And that realization opened a door they had spent months keeping closed. Stay till the end, because what happened when the stranger finally explained why they had used the words, "stay away," changed your soulmate's entire understanding of the conversation. They said, "Stay away only if you intend to return unchanged. Because if you go toward this person again, you cannot bring the same confusion, the same half-truths, and the same fear of choosing what your heart already recognizes." Those words landed differently. Your soulmate had expected judgment about you. Instead, they received a challenge about themselves. Suddenly, every excuse they had used became visible. Timing. Family expectations. Pride. Distance. Uncertainty. The opinions of people who had never experienced the connection themselves. Your soulmate realized that some of those obstacles were real, but others had become convenient walls. And behind those walls was one simple truth: they were afraid that choosing you honestly would require them to become honest everywhere else. Something huge is waiting for you, because the stranger had not finished. They leaned closer. Not dramatically, but with the calm seriousness of someone who understood the weight of what they were about to say, and asked your soulmate one question: when you imagine never speaking to this person again, do you feel peaceful, or do you feel like something important was left unfinished? Your soulmate could not answer. Their silence answered for them. Then something extraordinary happened inside that silence. Your soulmate began remembering everything in reverse. Not merely the beautiful moments, but the moments they had misunderstood. They remembered times when you became quiet and they assumed you no longer cared, when perhaps you were simply protecting your dignity. They remembered moments when you stopped explaining yourself because you had already explained enough. They remembered occasions when they expected you to chase them, only to discover that you were capable of loving deeply without abandoning yourself. Stay with me. This matters because the stranger's warning was slowly uncovering who you really were, not as some mysterious supernatural figure, but as someone your soulmate had repeatedly underestimated. They had mistaken your patience for endless availability. They had mistaken your silence for weakness. They had mistaken your distance for indifference. And most importantly, they had mistaken your emotional depth for something they could return to whenever they were finally ready. Don't look away now, because the stranger challenged that assumption. What makes you believe this person will remain exactly where you left them? Your soulmate's eyes lowered. Nobody had asked them that before. People around them had offered easy advice. Forget them. Move forward. Wait. Choose someone simpler. Protect your pride. But nobody had asked whether you were moving forward too. Nobody had asked whether your heart had been healing while theirs was hesitating. Nobody had asked whether the person they thought they could return to someday might be becoming stronger, clearer, and less willing to accept uncertainty. And suddenly your soulmate understood the real meaning behind who you really are. You were not the version of you preserved inside their memories. You were still growing. Still learning. Still becoming. The stranger said, "You speak about them as though their life stopped when you stepped away." It didn't. That sentence shook something loose. What comes next changes everything. Your soulmate realized they had unconsciously imagined you waiting inside the same emotional chapter while they took all the time they needed to decide what you meant to them. But your story had continued. Every disappointment had taught you something. Every unanswered question had strengthened a boundary. Every lonely evening had reminded you that your value could not depend on whether another person recognized it quickly enough. And there is spiritual symbolism hidden inside that transformation. A seed beneath the soil looks invisible, yet invisibility does not mean inactivity. Roots can deepen long before anything appears above the surface. Your soulmate had been looking at the surface of your story, unaware of the roots forming underneath. The stranger could see this pattern because they had witnessed it before in their own life. And now came the emotional twist your soulmate never expected. This stranger was not speaking from theory. Years earlier, they had walked away from someone who mattered deeply because they listened to everyone except their own honest understanding. They waited too long to return with clarity. By the time they finally understood, that person had grown into a life that no longer had room for uncertainty. The stranger was not trying to repeat that story through your soulmate. That was why the warning sounded so intense. "Stay away," they repeated, "if all you can offer is confusion. But if you know what this person means to you, stop treating clarity like something you have unlimited time to find." This is where the story begins again, because your soulmate suddenly stopped seeing the stranger as an interruption and started seeing the encounter as a mirror. They asked, almost quietly, "What if I already ruined it?" The stranger answered, "Then you don't begin by demanding another chance. You begin by becoming someone capable of respecting whatever answer you receive." Your soulmate had never considered that. They had imagined reconnection as a grand moment where feelings solved everything. But feelings alone could not repair misunderstanding. Words alone could not erase inconsistency. A connection could be meaningful and still require maturity. Your answer is closer than you think, because this realization transformed what your soulmate wanted from you. Until that moment, part of them wanted reassurance. They wanted to know you still cared. They wanted proof that the door remained open. They wanted certainty before taking an emotional risk. But the stranger showed them the contradiction. They wanted you to provide safety while they remained undecided. And you deserved something more balanced than that. Don't skip. Your soulmate then asked the question they had been afraid to ask from the beginning: "Why did you say, until you understand who they really are?" The stranger paused. Their answer came slowly. "Because from everything you've told me, this person isn't trying to control your path. They're forcing you to notice your own path simply by refusing to lose themselves inside it." Your soulmate felt those words deeply. Suddenly they remembered how many times you had allowed them freedom even when that freedom hurt you. You could have pressured. You could have manipulated. You could have turned affection into a bargaining tool. Instead, there were moments when you stepped back. Perhaps your soulmate once interpreted that as a lack of love. Now they were beginning to see another possibility. Maybe real care sometimes leaves space where control would have tightened its grip. Stay till the end, because the stranger then revealed the one detail that made your soulmate's heart race. They said, "There is something you keep doing every time you mention this person." Your soulmate asked what. The stranger smiled slightly and said, "You speak about everyone else in the past tense. But you speak about them as though the story is still happening." Silence. Your soulmate replayed their own words. The stranger was right. Other relationships had become memories. Other people were described through what happened. But whenever your name entered the conversation, your soulmate spoke in unfinished sentences. "I don't know why I still. Sometimes I wonder if, maybe one day, I wish I had." Every sentence left a door slightly open. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate finally understood that the deepest mystery had never been whether they could forget you. It was why, after everything, some part of them had never truly wanted to. The stranger looked at them and said, "Perhaps you are not being asked to chase this person. Perhaps you are being asked to stop running from what meeting them taught you." That distinction changed everything. Your soulmate did not need to create a fantasy. They did not need to force an outcome. They needed to become honest about what had happened inside them. And once that honesty began, something they had hidden even from themselves started rising toward the surface. Hours later, your soulmate was alone, but the conversation would not leave them. The stranger was gone, yet every sentence seemed louder in the quiet. "Stay with me, because this is where the once-in-a-lifetime revelation begins to unfold." Your soulmate reached for their phone. Your name was closer than they expected. Perhaps in an old conversation. Perhaps inside a photograph they had never deleted. Perhaps simply inside the search bar where they had typed your name more times than they would ever admit. Their finger hovered. They did not message you. Not yet. Because for the first time, they understood that reaching out simply because they felt lonely would repeat the very pattern the stranger had warned them about. They needed to know what they were actually prepared to say. "Don't look away now." Your soulmate opened an old message from you instead. It was something they had read before, perhaps many times, yet one sentence suddenly carried a completely different meaning. You had been telling them the truth long before the stranger appeared. Maybe not in exactly these words, but through your actions you had been saying, "I can care about you without disappearing inside your uncertainty. I can hope without putting my entire life on hold. I can forgive without pretending nothing happened. I can love and still choose dignity." Your soulmate finally saw it. Who you really are was never a secret identity waiting for some dramatic reveal. The real secret was the strength they had overlooked because they were too focused on whether you would stay. You were becoming someone who understood that being chosen late is not automatically the same as being chosen well. And suddenly your soulmate became aware of time, not as a countdown, not as a threat, but as something precious. What comes next changes everything, because they began writing something. At first, it looked like a message to you. Then they deleted it. They wrote another. Deleted that too. Every version sounded too easy. "I miss you" was true, but incomplete. "I've been thinking about you" was true, but insufficient. "Can we talk" felt like asking you to carry the emotional weight again. Your soulmate stared at the blank screen until they understood what needed to change. Before they could tell you how they felt, they needed to acknowledge what their hesitation had cost. This is where the story begins at its deepest level. They started writing again, but this time they did not begin with themselves. They began with you. They wrote about the things they finally understood, that your patience had limits because your self-respect mattered, that your silence had contained feelings they never bothered to ask about. That you had carried uncertainty longer than they realized, that they had sometimes expected access to your heart without offering enough clarity in return. They stopped. Their eyes became heavy with emotion. Your answer is closer than you think, because right then another memory returned, something you once said that they had dismissed at the time. A simple sentence about wanting honesty more than perfection. They finally understood it. You had never required them to have every answer. You had only needed them to stop pretending they felt nothing while their actions said otherwise. Don't skip, because at that exact moment your soulmate noticed something strange about the stranger's final words. Before leaving, the stranger had said, "When you finally understand who this person is, you will understand why meeting them changed you." Your soulmate originally assumed that meant discovering some secret about you. Now they realized the sentence pointed inward. You were the person who made them confront the difference between attention and commitment, between attachment and genuine care, between wanting someone and being prepared to treat them with consistency. The spiritual symbolism became impossible to ignore. Sometimes a mirror does not give you something new, it reveals what was already standing there. Sometimes a closed door is not punishment, it asks whether you have learned how to knock with respect instead of entitlement. Sometimes distance is not the ending, it is the space where two people discover who they are without using each other as emotional shelter. And sometimes the person who changes your life is not the person who promises to rescue you, but the person whose presence quietly reminds you to become more truthful. Stay till the end. Your soulmate looked again at the unfinished message. Something had shifted. They were no longer thinking, "How do I make them come back?" They were thinking, "How do I become honest enough to face whatever they choose?" That was the transformation. That was the revelation. Something huge is waiting for you, because just when your soulmate thought they finally understood why the stranger had appeared, their phone lit up. Not with your message. Not with your name. It was something completely unexpected, a photograph sent by someone they knew. Your soulmate opened it, and for several seconds they could only stare. There, in the background of the photograph, was the stranger from earlier. But that was not the shocking part. The shocking part was where the photograph had been taken and who was standing only a few steps away from that stranger. Your soulmate enlarged the image. Their heartbeat quickened as a detail became visible that connected the stranger, your past, and a conversation your soulmate had never known existed. And suddenly one terrifyingly beautiful question replaced every other thought. Had that meeting really been accidental, or had the stranger recognized your name long before they ever claimed they did?